Now, before we actually begin the installation, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to remove that test VM, that Windows or Debian VM that we're using to run iPerf and SAR, everything we're using to evaluate our environment, that's going to go. We're going to take note of the data stores. If we want to reuse, if we've made the pools that we're going to try to use for our production Sky instance, we want to make note of the data stores we used, the iSCSI initiators we used, the LUNs we used. We just did all this testing on these components. So obviously, if we got good numbers, we want to reuse them. So make note, and you could just go right into the VMX config in the VM, and you can copy that file out, and that will tell you everything that you had configured. Generally just pen and paper, make a quick note of how you set things up. But if you're really looking for kind of an exhaustive configuration, maybe you want to save it so that you can use this test VM later to qualify other environments for Sky. I would just grab the VMX config. That way you could just deploy from that if you needed to. Alternatively, just clone the VM that you use to test it, and you could vMotion it to whatever new environment you needed to assess. Now, we're also going to note the disks that we created for the pools. We can either reuse disks if we were able to set up our production level disks, or we can or if we just went test size, that 400 gig primary, 10 gig snap, 1 terabyte dedupe, we're going to want to note where we set those up so that when we go to do the install and we go for the full, maybe 50 terabyte dedupe pool, 30 terabyte snap, we know exactly where we stood it up. We know what the metrics were to that controller and that disk, and we can basically just take this tiny VM that we've been doing all of our testing with, drop Sky on top of it, grow those pools out, and we should get, obviously the results are going to be a little bit different, but they should be very, very similar. We shouldn't hit any issues if we do it like this. And then to get started, we're going to copy the installation OVA. So that's going to be Sky 8.1, Sky 8.0.1, what have you, .OVA. We're going to copy it over, and we're going to deploy the Sky appliance from the OVF. As you can see here, we'll go to File, Deploy OVF. We will select the OVF here. You can see the path where I've got it stored. Now you will immediately see 130 gigabyte drive get created. Now this is not part of the primary pool, the snap pool, or the dedupe pool. This is the boot drive for the VM itself. You do not need to create this disk, and you should not ever manage this disk. The deployment of the OVA will actually create this disk, get the boot drive set up, and it will just take care of all of this for you. Because we are dealing with kind of the notions of disks as pools, whenever we're talking about disk use, I just want to give you a detailed explanation of what each one does. I don't want you to boot it up and say, wait, I should only have 3 pools and I see 4. What's going on? There's an extra disk. That extra 130 gigabyte disk that you see is just the boot drive for the Sky appliance itself. And once that's laid down, we're going to give it a name. Any name that VMware will take is absolutely fine. We'll select our ESX server. Now, this is very important for the creation of the disks. The disks need to be thick provision, eager zeroed. Again, thick provision, eager zero. I know with your hosts, a lot of times that we tell you to save on MDL to use thin provisioning. Well, again, for all the reasons we say thin provisioning is great for hosts, those are all the same reasons that thin provisioning is terrible for a Sky appliance. We don't ever want those disks to be moved or changed or put into a share or accessible by anybody else. This is production data service. We need to be isolated. You don't want a random user to start writing their PowerPoint data into your dedupe pool. Absolute last thing you want. So just, make sure they're thick provision, eager zero. That will make sure that they don't grow. It also helps keep them isolated. After this, we're going to add IPs. Now, we're still on the ESX server, still in vSphere. So we're going to add our IPs here, which will be auto-populated in the installer later. Now, it'll take a minute for the OVA to finish deployment. Depends on your system, generally 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Once it's done, you will see Sky show up in your inventory on that left-hand pane. You can see it right here at the end of the arrow. Now we're going to select that Sky, and it'll be obviously whatever name you named it. And we're going to select Edit Settings. And this is where we're going to do all of our stuff like setting CPU memory reservations, disabling the balloon filter, setting up our iSCSI initiators, everything, all the magic happens right here. So again, I just kind of reiterate that there will be 4 total disks. You're going to create 3 disks that are going to be pools, and then you get plus 1 disk at the end. That's the boot drive for your Sky appliance. Now you're going to want to go in and check out this pane here, the left-hand pane under the virtual machine properties, to make sure that those disks were added. If for some reason you speed along and not all 3 of them get in there, it's okay. We can come back and we can fix it. But generally, as you can see in the screenshot here, it says new hard disk adding. Wait until those complete and then continue. As a matter of fact, I don't think you will be able to continue until they do complete, because the next step is to actually power on the VM. So we're going to right click, power, and we will power on Sky. Generally what I'll do after I power on Sky is I'll send a ping to it, and then about a minute, 30 seconds to a minute after it starts returning ping, all the web services are up, and we can now access the Sky appliance via browser. Thank you for joining us for another YouTube Tech Tip video. If you like the content you're seeing on this channel, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you will be alerted to any future content.